This is Bright Sunday. We're supposed to laugh a little bit in church, so I'm going to transition a little bit to a funny song about Jesus. Now, Jesus and I have been together for a long time, and I have taken all my problems to Jesus, but he's a friend of mine. I know him. I think he knows me. And so, just like my friends, I bring some of my problems to my friends. I also bring some of my funny stories to my friends, too. And that's what we're doing today with Jesus. So we're going to get to the wounds in Jesus' side and hands in just a moment. But I've always wondered what Jesus would be like in our modern world, because we actually believe he's still alive. That is something Christians believe very strongly, that he is still with us here in this place. And if he was living in this modern world, I wonder what he would think about some of the things we deal with today. And this is just how my mind works. Maybe you don't think about these things. It's okay if you don't. Would Jesus have an iPhone? Would he need a shockproof case? And if he cracked the screen one day, would he heal it to save face? Or would he have an Android because he was poor and troubled? Would we turn our backs on him after seeing his green text bubble? Would Jesus take an Uber after partying one night? And would he tip the driver even if he ran a red light? And would he ask the driver, please, I'd rather not talk. I'm listening to a sermon podcast about St. Cornelius and their iconic flock. Would Jesus join a CrossFit gym, or would that be awkward? And would he re-wrap his waist? Would his grunts even be heard? And would he take a selfie and spray himself with Axe? Would his smile beam with love when you benched your max? Would Jesus use a dating app just to see who's out there? And would he text you eagerly, then disappear into thin air? And if he held a fish Peter caught, would you swipe right? And if you wholly ghosted him, he'd still be with you on your dateless night when you binge Netflix and play video games and drink wine and feel sad and text an ex. And would Jesus go to therapy? Would he set a boundary? And would he talk about his mom and Mary Magdalene? And if it's not in network, would he pay his copay? Would he believe that he could heal from that first Good Friday? Sometimes I wonder if Jesus would even care about this world so full of noise, doom scrolling with despair. And then I see him pull out his phone, Uber Eats is on the way, with a living bread from heaven and wine to face the day. Would Jesus have an iPhone? Would he need a shockproof case? Woo! Thank you. Hope that cheered you up a little bit.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I find the Gospels to be so funny. Just comedy. You know, and comedy in the kind of military humor that I got used to in the Marine Corps and in the Army. I spent 20 years in both of those organizations. And to have comedy you have to have a hard wall to push against, like this wall here. Like, it's got to be solid, you know? And so when you're standing there at attention and somebody's yelling at you for not standing straight enough, and they're in your face yelling at somebody else, they're saying things, and you look across the aisle of the squad bay, you see your buddy, and you're staring right into each other's eyes, trying not to laugh while you're standing there in your underwear, you know. Those are moments of great comedy. And you have to have this hard wall to push against. Religion, the faith, even the Gospels provide this really solid comedy wall. They used to call that the straight man in the comedy duo, the guy who's kind of serious and kind of always takes things seriously. And the faith offers that. It's one of the reasons we teach children the basics of the faith. We want to give them something to push against, not just comedically, but in all of life. Something that they have to deal with and see and understand. And that's called adolescence. That's a really hard transition to make in life. I teach in a middle school now. I see it every day. That what are the rules of life? What does it matter? Why do we have to do this, Mr. Peters, over and over again? Why? And I ask that same question of these texts that I come to. After 2,000 years, we're coming to the text, and we're asking the same question, why? Why did Jesus have to die? Why did he have to die? Why did he rise from the dead? And how do I use that in my life to get through this life that you have to live tomorrow? They have this thing called the Sunday Scaries, you know, where you get anxious on Sunday afternoon, so you clean and stuff in your house, maybe. I don't know what you do when you're anxious, but that's a response to that pressure that we all feel in this life, in this modern world with iPhones and Androids and all that stuff. And so when we come to this second Sunday of Easter, we have this rare opportunity to see Jesus like a whole week of his life. Rises from the dead on Easter Sunday, that's a pretty big deal in Christianity. Still is. I mean, did you have a few more people last week here than you did this week? That's like normal in most churches. I'm a church planter. I spent the last number of years of my life planting a church, much like this one. And sometimes at Easter, there's like a little drop in attendance because people like go off to their relatives' churches and stuff. It's like, okay, like, no, we're going to celebrate this together. And you guys have done that in a really powerful way. We live in a Good Friday world, and you are Easter people in that Good Friday world, witnessing that the power of death is not the end. And you walk through that with each other this Easter week. But here we have this second Sunday of Easter in the Bible. John tells us about it. And it's a real, like, disaster, attendance-wise. There's only 10 disciples there in this upper room. And the door's locked. Nobody's allowed in. I mean, I don't know if you feel that post-Easter letdown every year. I know as a priest I do, because you do all this stuff to make it like perfect for everybody, and then, you know, like the egg hunt doesn't go as well as planned or whatever, and just, I failed everything. So encourage your clergy, encourage Mother Rachel this week if you can. This is a lot of pressure on us. But the disciples have 10 of them there. That's all they've got. Thomas is missing. Judas is obviously missing. And this is the whole church, 10 guys. And maybe even the other disciples that were women. It doesn't really say much about them. But it's these 10 guys. That's it. It's pretty dismal, pretty bleak. And Christianity is like that sometimes. And our Christian lives are like that sometimes. That after this high of Easter, or whatever high we've experienced, there's a low. That's why they call it Low Sunday. I worked for the priest who used to schedule baptisms on Low Sunday after Easter just to get a few more people there. You know, this is the desperation of the church, and the church is desperate. The modern church is more like these 10 guys than it is like Easter Sunday, with everybody excited that Jesus is alive. Sometimes it feels like he's gone, like he's not there anymore, like we might have seen him, but maybe what we saw wasn't really true. And the traumatic events of Good Friday will do that to you in this Good Friday world. The traumatic events of your life will make you doubt reality. You can't always see what's really there. You might think people that love you hate you. You might think that there's people out to get you. You might think that things are broken in ways that they'll never get better, and that your life will be one endless succession of Good Fridays again and again. And it sounds like the disciples are kind of in that space only 7 days after he rises from the dead. And what are we supposed to do 2,000 years later? Are we supposed to have this Easter hope again? Well, this is why we have the story. maybe we can get something from it. He appears to them, and his message is two things. Peace, everybody, and look at these things, these holes in my hand. That's the message. And the Christian church has contemplated that for a long time. Peace, and then these wounds in his hand, these markings, these places where nails were pierced into his flesh, and he bled, and it was painful. And now there's something else. There are signs of something. Maybe it's love, maybe it's sacrifice, maybe it's forgiveness. And he kind of goes with that and says, if you forgive people's sins, they will be forgiven. Do we have any idea how powerful this is? We live in a world where either people get away with everything, because they have power and wealth or whatever it is, or they get away with nothing. And they get punished disproportionately for what they probably deserve. And we live in this world where there's like nobody in between, it seems, where justice is really not a thing that is equal for everybody, even though our justice system strives for that. My son's working at the Supreme Court right now in the United States. He's there with the Archer Fellowship as a student at the University of Texas. And I got to tour with him. And there's all these symbols there at the Supreme Court of saying we're supposed to administer justice equally to everybody. It doesn't always seem to work that way in our lives, even though that's the ideal, that's the standard. That's what we're all going for. And in this Good Friday world where the greatest injustice that seems to be ever done on this planet, an innocent man is crucified, tortured to death in front of everybody. This is where the disciples are thinking about. They're meditating on that. That's what they're concerned about. The Christian church has worked out our whole belief system based on staring at this image of the cross and saying there is something in that for me. And what that is, I think, is the forgiveness of sins. When we come to this table, when it comes to the chalice, drink this, all of you, for the forgiveness of sins. When you sip from that chalice or dip your bread in or whatever you do or be in the presence of it, there's something happening with the forgiveness of your sins. And I don't know if you believe in sin anymore. It's not a modern English word. We just, we sinfully delightful chocolate dessert. We use it in that context. You won't hear anybody talking about sin in modern English. It's not a word we really use other than in a religious context. But I don't know about you, but I've got some sins in my life. Things done and left undone. And what do I do with those things in the extreme world we live in? Either it's complete annihilation or it's forget about it. And forgiveness is something completely different. It's not a revenge, a disproportionate justice. It is not even justice. We don't even get what we deserve fully. It is forgiveness. It is the absorption of that evil into the body of Christ. And he bears that on the cross for you and for me. And so when you bring something to God, the deepest, darkest thing of your life, the thing that you're most ashamed of, he can handle it. And he puts those wounds out in front before you even see his face, because he wants you to know that he has them too. You cannot be crucified and not have some kind of trauma from that. We see the visible wounds of Jesus, but we don't always believe in the invisible wounds of Jesus. Trauma is the turning upside down of your safe world, where nothing is safe anymore, nothing is the same. We might call it PTSD, we might call it moral injury, we might call it trauma, we might call it a lot of things. People have had names for this since the dawn of time. But it's all the same. And that is the stuff that we bring to Jesus, because he can handle it. But only 10 disciples are there. That's why these 10 disciples have a responsibility to tell others what Jesus can do for them. When you hear a hard story from a friend, when you hear something that you got no answer for, that you can't answer and help them in any way, shape, or form, you can't undo what happened to them, you can't change the past, you can't do anything about it, and if you're involved in the harm yourself, that's even harder to do, to undo that. All we can do is tell this story. And this is what the Christian church has done over and over again, tell the same story. There was a man who came, and he lived a perfect life, and he healed and forgave. And then he was falsely accused, and he was crucified, executed, tortured. And then he rose from the dead, and that power is still in us. The power to have a new Easter every single day. sometimes every hour of every day. And this is the Easter that these disciples tell Thomas about. Now, Thomas is a twin. I know some twins in my life. I have twin cousins, and you couldn't tell them apart. I heard this in a sermon. Don't quote this to any seminary professor. But this guy, Chad, he's a great priest, and he's a great preacher. And he said, I wonder if Thomas, because he was mistaken for his brother all his life as a young guy, he just realized that people were stupid. And that people are idiots. And they really can't tell, one from the other. And he could. He's one of them. It's easy for them, right? My cousins Billy and Johnny could tell each other apart, but we couldn't. They would switch shirts day to day just to confuse everybody. They had a lot of fun with it. And Thomas has grown up this way. He knows that people really don't see very well. In fact, they might mistake him for the other one. And if you've ever dealt with eyewitness testimony, with AI now, we live in the age of eyewitness testimony. You can't believe videos you see anymore. You see an elephant, running down the safari or whatever. You don't know if that elephant's real or not. It's hard to tell. We live in the age of the eyewitness again. Eyewitnesses are kind of unreliable sometimes, at least when it comes to fine details. And Thomas knows this. Maybe that's why he's doubting Thomas, that Jesus says, you don't have to doubt Thomas. We often think of it as some belief or not belief kind of thing. But Thomas also has a wound of trust. When you see the leader of your movement, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, you see God incarnate die on a cross, a Roman cross, the ultimate failure and shame, and you wouldn't come away from that the same. And maybe Thomas is exhibiting the first signs of trauma of all the disciples. The other ones are locked in their room, and he's just not even going to show up. One of the things about trauma is you got to have a way out. You go somewhere, you got to have a way out. You got to have a way of escape. You don't get trapped anywhere. Maybe that upper room is the place he wants to get trapped in. So it's not so much he doesn't really believe it's possible that somebody could come back from the dead, but he just doesn't trust anybody anymore. And if you've been there, you know what that feels like. And this is who Jesus comes to. He comes to the people who can't trust anymore and offers them some trust. And he says, go ahead, trust me. I can take it. I can handle it. Because I'm just like you. He is just like us. And so Thomas recognizes that, and he says, my Lord and my God. And everything in his life changes. And there's a story about Thomas that when he goes to India, travels, risks his life to go to tell this story of forgiveness to these people that they had heard stories about and far away. And somebody takes a spear and shoves it in his side. And they have the spear in a glass case there. You can see it. And he dies the same way Jesus dies. A spear in his side. Witness to the truth that the power of death is not the end. And the little deaths in your life that you've suffered and will suffer will all be healed in the resurrection. And it will happen someday in the great resurrection, but it happens in little ways every day, here and now, as long as we are open to it, as long as we see the wounded hands of Jesus coming towards us, and we touch them, and we see them, and we trust again. Today is an invitation to trust God again, that the stuff in your life that you don't think you can fix, you don't think will get better, can get better, can be healed. Not because of any willpower of our own or success or anything like that, but because we are loved by God. And the symbol of love is this cross. The symbol of love is that empty tomb. And it is open to all. Amen.